So we have this great chart that, we could throw up at some point, but it basically looks at plotting the different sort of partners that we have in the space in terms of addressability and in terms of programmatic versus manual. And so, really when you think about it, the IPTV space or CTV, OTT is really the only space where you get like up and to the right, meaning you have a lot of addressability because you can buy this against audiences. That's a little bit nascent, but it's getting better. And so device ID graphs and household graphs are getting strong enough that we can actually start buying audiences within the space. But it's also programmatic, right? Because it's IP enabled, it's internet protocol enabled. So, which is very different from anything in the linear TV space. So even when we think about data-driven linear, or even household addressable, right, which we can buy through the MVPDs, and soon we can buy them through the programmers as well. That's still a very manual process. And so really IPTV space is the only place that we would use the term programmatic television, right? Because technically you're on the largest screen. In terms of inventory, that's obviously growing. Like you said at the beginning of this question, we're seeing that by far the fastest growing media right now is adoption of CTV, OTT. People are continuing to cancel their cable subscriptions and adopt more and more of their TV viewership through these OTT and CTV devices and apps. And so we're really at a point now where even when we consider Nielsen figures, which we feel is probably underrepresenting OTT viewership, that even when we look at 50 plus or 65 plus, meaning demos, they're already watching upwards to 8 hours per week of OTT. So we're seeing that even the adoption among the older demographics is starting to happen. We're also seeing that COVID, the virus, and having everyone sort of stuck at home and isolating has increased adoption, but then also increased the amount of time people are spending with OTT, right? And so where they might have been people who are really only, maybe they're watching Netflix, maybe they're watching YouTube or Hulu, the big players, they're now starting to delve into less popular apps, but apps that are certainly growing. So think about Tubi and Pluto and Vudu and Crackle and places like that. So we are seeing a massive increase in those impressions. And so as an agency, our job is to figure out what is the, how are those audiences dividing their time across linear television and the OTT space. What does that do to our channel mix, right? How do we invest? What's the appropriate investment in both channels? And then finally, how do we start looking at true cross-screen reach frequencies so that we have a better understanding of, by adding in all this OTT, are we really gaining reach or are we just blowing out frequency? So those are all the things that we're, really, keeping a close eye on. I think we'll start with OR. I think what's exciting there is obviously their ability to start powering in conjunction with some other techniques and other players in the space, like let's say Canoe. The ability to start inserting household addressable ads within the national pod, which is very different from what we've had for household addressable, where we've mainly worked with the MVPDs or the cable operators like Comcast, Ampersand, and a bunch of others, AT&T, Dish TV, DirecTV, and where you're inserted in those local pods, right? So I think for a lot of national advertisers who have been concerned about some of the the environments that you can be in within the local pods, having access to the national pods, I think is going to be very exciting. And so, we are certainly want to be part of that pilot testing, which is going to be happening, I believe, at the end of the summer. So that's great news, and we've already been in talks with the programmers who are involved in those pilots. So that work and that conversation has already started. And then in terms of the work that we're doing with Clipped and with OpenAP is also very exciting, where this is kind of getting into closer to that programmatic TV area, where it gives us the ability via APIs to buy inventory through platforms in a more, I don't want to say real time, but in a faster way. But also by tying audiences to it as well, right? So optimizing the inventory against audiences, advanced audiences, whether that's first or third party data, and then being able to purchase that inventory through a platform. So it's not quite programmatic still, but it's getting us further down the road in terms of platform-based, data-driven planning and buying. So very excited for that as well. And by the way, when you combine Clipped, which I believe is being pulled under the Invest TV name, and OpenAP, you really have access to almost all of the network group inventory. So it's going to have really deep coverage, which I think is also very important to us and our clients.
And finally, Matt, if you could have any advice to the SSPs, and I'm sure you work with a number of them, around sort of best practices around CTV, what would you suggest?
That's a great question. I would say that I think just enabling more true programmatic access, which is not always on the SSP side. Sometimes that is a combination of a conversation with both the SSPs as well as the publishers, but allowing for more FEP, for example, to be decisionable, right? I think the capabilities are there, but I think working directly with both entities, the SSPs as well as the publishers, to allow us to fill in a way that allows us to do more audience-based buying in that space, I think is something that's key. And I mean, when we think about it, I would say the majority of the impressions that are available through OTT, CTV, are really longer form inventory outside of course, YouTube, but a lot of what people are watching on the devices are long form programs. So it would be a shame to have the IP enablement and the ability to do true programmatic, but then not actually implement it, right? So I think that's a place where we can all grow together.